The library was nearly empty at this hour. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of pages filled the silence. Jungkook sat hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen casting sharp shadows across his tired face. His thesis deadline loomed, and exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Then, a deep voice cut through the silence. "You're still here." Jungkook's fingers froze over his keyboard. He knew that voice all too well. Slowly, he turned his head, his eyes meeting the intense gaze of Professor Kim Taehyung. Dressed in a black button-up with the sleeves rolled up, Taehyung exuded authority, confidence, a man who had never known struggle the way Jungkook had. He stood beside the desk with one hand resting on the wooden surface, his sharp eyes scanning the laptop screen before flickering back to Jungkook's face. Jungkook swallowed hard. "I needed more time," he murmured, shifting in his seat. Taehyung hummed, the sound deep and thoughtful. "You're struggling?" It wasn't a question. Jungkook let out a small, breathy laugh, running a hand through his hair. "That obvious?" The professor leaned in slightly, close enough that Jungkook could catch the faint scent of expensive cologne, woodsy, rich, utterly intoxicating. "You're talented, Jungkook," Taehyung said, voice dropping to something dangerously smooth. "But talent alone won't get you through this. You need help." Jungkook tensed. There was something about the way Taehyung said it, something in the way his eyes darkened as they held his. A slow, knowing smirk played on Taehyung's lips as he tilted his head. "I can help you," he continued, tapping his fingers against the desk. "Ensure your thesis gets approved. Make everything easier for you." Jungkook's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Taehyung didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned in further, his voice a mere whisper. "Sleep with me." The words hung heavy in the air, suffocating, intoxicating. Jungkook's breath hitched. "You're joking," but the look in Taehyung's eyes said otherwise. "I don't joke about things I want," Taehyung murmured. Jungkook's mind raced. He should say no. He should be disgusted, outraged, anything but tempted. Yet, memories of a night long ago flashed in his mind, taut muscles under his fingertips, heated breaths against his skin, a kiss that never became more. He forced himself to look away, but Taehyung reached out, brushing his fingers against Jungkook's wrist. The touch was light, almost hesitant. "Think about it," he said, stepping back. "You have until tomorrow." Then, he turned and walked away, leaving Jungkook staring at the empty space where he stood, heart pounding, breath shaky, temptation curling in his chest like wildfire. Jungkook didn't move for a long time. The weight of Taehyung's words lingered, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. "Sleep with me." The audacity. The sheer arrogance of it. And yet, his fingers curled against his lap as memories flickered through his mind, stolen glances in dimly lit hallways, lingering touches that lasted too long to be accidental, a night years ago when they had almost crossed that line. Back then, Taehyung wasn't his professor. He was just a man, an older, impossibly attractive man who had made Jungkook's heart race in ways he couldn't explain. But Jungkook had backed away before things could go too far. Now, he wasn't sure if he regretted it. He exhaled sharply and shut his laptop, rubbing his temples. He needed to get out of here. The cold night air hit his face as he stepped outside the university building. The city lights flickered in the distance, the streets mostly empty. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and walked toward the bus stop, trying to push away the memory of Taehyung's voice, smooth, deep, unwavering. "I don't joke about things I want." Jungkook coughed under his breath. Of course he doesn't. Taehyung was used to getting what he wanted. He was rich, powerful, the kind of man people didn't say no to. But Jungkook wasn't just anybody. His stomach twisted as he considered his situation. His thesis was hanging by a thread. His advisor had already hinted that it wasn't strong enough, that he needed support from someone with influence. And Taehyung? He was influence. He could make Jungkook's life easier with a snap of his fingers. Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. "What kind of twisted drama?" he muttered. But beneath the frustration, a dangerous curiosity burned. What if he said yes? Would it just be a transaction? A one-time thing? Or would it turn into something else? Don't be stupid, Jungkook. Yet, his heart pounded at the thought. He was still lost in his thoughts when his phone buzzed. New message, Professor Kim. "Hope you got home safely, Jungkook. Don't think too hard. Some decisions are simpler than you think." His breath caught. Was it? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He should ignore it. Should tell Taehyung to shove his proposition where the sun didn't shine. But instead, replying, "We both know it's not that simple, Professor." A response came almost instantly. "Come see me tomorrow. Let's make it simple together." Jungkook stared at the screen, pulse racing. This was dangerous. He knew it. But maybe, just maybe, he wanted to get burned. Jungkook barely slept at night. He tossed and turned, his mind a mess of tangled emotions. His pride screamed at him to refuse, to throw Taehyung's offer back in his face. But logic was a cruel thing. He wasn't in a position to be reckless. His scholarship barely covered rent. His part-time job at the cafe wasn't enough to keep him afloat. If his thesis got rejected, he would have to start over, lose a year, maybe even drop out. And Taehyung? Taehyung could fix everything with a single word. By morning, Jungkook had his answer. The office door loomed before him like a final warning. Professor Kim. Taehyung's nameplate gleamed under the dim hallway light, mocking him. Jungkook hesitated, heart pounding. A part of him wished Taehyung had been bluffing. That this was some twisted joke to test him. But no. The message was clear. Come see me tomorrow. Let's make it simple together. Taking a deep breath, Jungkook knocked. Come in. The moment he stepped inside, he was surrounded by the scent of rich cologne and warm leather. Taehyung sat behind his desk, fingers steeped, watching him like he had already won. Jungkook shut the door behind him. I thought about it, he said, forcing his voice to stay even. Taehyung's lips curled into a smirk. And Jungkook swallowed. He wanted to play it cool, but every fiber of his being was on edge under that gaze. I need to know, he exhaled sharply. Is this just about control? About proving you can have whatever you want? Taehyung stood, slowly making his way around the desk. That's what you think? Jungkook lifted his chin, refusing to back down. I don't know what to think. Taehyung came closer, stopping just inches away. He was taller, broader, imposing in a way that sent a shiver down Jungkook's spine. Let me be clear, Jungkook. His voice was low, smooth as silk. If this was just about control, I would have had you years ago. Jungkook's breath hitched. Taehyung lifted a hand, tracing the line of Jungkook's jaw with his fingers. It was barely a touch, but it set his skin on fire. You think I don't remember that night? Taehyung murmured, You were the one who walked away. Jungkook clenched his fists. And now you're putting me in a position where I can't. Taehyung smiled. A slow, dangerous thing. You always have a choice. His fingers ghosted over Jungkook's wrist before he pulled back. But make it now. The air between them was thick, suffocating. Jungkook's heart pounded. And then, finally, I'll do it, he whispered. Taehyung's eyes darkened. Good, he reached for Jungkook's tie, fingers curling around the fabric. He didn't pull, just held, as if savoring the moment. Then let's begin. Jungkook's breath came shallow as Taehyung's fingers curled around his tie, the silk tightening ever so slightly against his throat. Not enough to choke, just enough to remind him who was in control here. The room was unbearably quiet, save for the soft rustle of fabric as Taehyung took a step closer. Jungkook willed himself to stay still, to not show how much his body was already betraying him. You're tense, Taehyung murmured. Jungkook scoffed, forcing himself to sound unaffected. What do you expect? Taehyung chuckled, the sound deep and smooth. You're acting as if I'm forcing you. Jungkook's jaw clenched. Aren't you? Taehyung tilted his head, studying him. I told you, you always have a choice. His fingers loosened on Jungkook's tie, sliding down to graze his chest before pulling away entirely. Jungkook exhaled, though he wasn't sure if it was relief or disappointment. Taehyung moved back toward his desk and sat on the edge, looking completely at ease, as if this were just another casual conversation. Tell me, Jungkook, he said. Are you doing this because you feel like you have no other option? Or, his gaze dropped, lingering on Jungkook's lips before flickering back up. Because you want to? Jungkook's pulse hammered. Because he wanted to? That was the worst part. He wasn't sure anymore. He should hate this. He should hate Taehyung for putting him in this situation. And yet, standing here, the distance between them charged with an electricity he could barely contain, he knew there was another part of him, one that had never fully let go of that night years ago, desperate to see what would happen if he gave in. I don't know, Jungkook admitted, voice quiet. Taehyung hummed, pleased by the honesty. Then let's find out. The words barely had time to register before Taehyung reached for him again, this time, without hesitation. A hand wrapped around Jungkook's wrist, pulling him forward until their bodies were a breath apart. Jungkook could feel the heat radiating off of him, the steady rise and fall of Taehyung's chest. His professor leaned in, voice dropping to a near whisper. Last chance. Jungkook swallowed hard. His skin burned where Taehyung touched him, and he knew, if he crossed this line, there was no going back. But when had he ever been the type to walk away twice? His fingers curled into Taehyung's shirt, gripping the fabric as if grounding himself. Okay, he whispered. Taehyung's lips curved. Good, and then, he pulled Jungkook in, erasing the space between them. Jungkook barely had time to process before Taehyung's lips pressed against his, firm and deliberate. Heat. That was the first thing he felt. Taehyung him like he had already claimed him, like he had been waiting for this moment far too long to hold back now. And Jungkook should have resisted, should have pulled away, should have. But instead, his fingers tightened around Taehyung's shirt, his body betraying him as he leaned into the kiss. It wasn't gentle. There was nothing hesitant about the way Taehyung's hand slid up his neck, fingers threading into his hair, tilting his head just so he could deepen. His other hand gripped Jungkook's waist, pulling him flush against his body. Jungkook gasped against his lips, And Taehyung took advantage of the moment, his tongue sliding in with sinful ease, tasting, taking, consuming. His back hit the desk. He barely registered how Taehyung guided him onto the surface, strong hands bracing against his thighs as he pressed between them. "This is what you wanted too," Taehyung murmured against his skin, lips dragging along his jaw, his pulse lower. Jungkook's breath hitched. "Shut up," he muttered, but it came out weak, breathless. Taehyung chuckled, the sound vibrating against his throat. "That's not a denial," Jungkook didn't answer. Because he didn't have one. Every inch of his body was burning, aching, drowning in the sensation of Taehyung's touch. It had been years since that night, since he had turned away before they could cross that line, but he had always wondered. Always thought about what could have happened if he had stayed. Now, he had his answer. Taehyung wasn't soft. He wasn't patient. He was controlled, purposeful. Every touch, every breath stolen between them was laced with intent. Jungkook barely registered when his shirt was unbuttoned, when Taehyung's fingers traced over his skin with a slow, possessive drag. Still thinking, Taehyung whispered against his ear. Jungkook's head spun. "You talk too much," Taehyung smirked. "And you're impatient." Jungkook was about to snap back, but then Taehyung bit down lightly on his neck, and whatever retort he had died in his throat. This was insane. He had come here prepared to make a choice, but now he wasn't even sure if he had made one, or if Taehyung had made it for him. And the worst part? He didn't care. Not when Taehyung was him like this, not when his hands were mapping over his body like he already owned him. Not when Jungkook had already given in. Hours later, Jungkook lay entangled in sheets, staring at the ceiling. His body ached, every inch of him marked by what had transpired, by the hands that had traced, taken, claimed. Beside him, Taehyung lay with an arm draped over his waist, breath warm against his bare shoulder. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like a mistake. But all Jungkook could feel was the quiet hum of satisfaction beneath his skin, the undeniable truth that, for the first time in years, he had stopped running from what he wanted. He turned his head slightly, watching the slow rise and fall of Taehyung's chest. What now? Before he could even begin to answer, Taehyung's voice broke through the silence. "Don't overthink." His hand slid lower, fingers tracing lazy circles against Jungkook. "Just sleep," Jungkook huffed. "You keep saying that," Taehyung smirked, eyes still closed. "Because you never listen," Jungkook sighed. He didn't argue this time. Because maybe, just this once, he didn't want to.